Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. And John, those the details there for the USA were fascinating, mainly because, you know, of course, the journey that comes into the UK and EU has so many similarities and yet so many differences as well. So for this part of the talk, we wanted to talk a little bit about overseas sellers from outside the European geographic region. Just share my screen to enter the EU and the UK market. So as opposed to what John was talking about in terms of European sellers going to the US, this is literally the reverse if you're watching this webinar and you're coming in from the outside. So thanks for having me. My name is Riki. I'm the GM at Global E-commerce Experts, and the business has been around for about a decade and has grown 2,000 or more sellers into the UK and the EU. So I think some of these stats you've already seen. We've got this huge market, as the guys have said. You know, the numbers are relatively mixed in terms of the accuracy, but let's just lay it out. There's a massive opportunity from the UK market, from the European market. And I'm splitting those two things up because, of course, a few years ago, for whatever reason, the UK decided to leave Europe. We're still in the same place. We're still geographically in the region, but we're no longer in the EU, and as such, makes the situation slightly more complicated. But by no means something that should be shied away from. The reason being, the UK market is enormous and actually outperforms much of the European marketplaces, even combined in some cases. So for a seller that's coming from outside the European area, it's certainly worth considering doing both the UK and the EU regions at once. And for some sellers, certainly if you're coming from the US, who are dabbling into global expansion from the outset, the UK market being the same language, or although not the same language, but the same language, is certainly slightly easier to get the ball rolling. So we are specifically here talking about the European marketplaces, as opposed to, as John was talking about, the US market. So the well-trodden pathway, hey, look, as I said, there's some real similarities there of what that looks like. You need to start by doing your market research. You need to start by becoming compliant, and that's tax compliance, label compliance. We'll touch on a little bit more about them. You need to get launched. You need somewhere to fulfill them from. You need to promote and all those pieces in there. So the expansion journey itself, that fundamental backbone of expanding, is very similar than it is expanding to anywhere else. See what the scope of the opportunity is. Make sure you're allowed and you can comply, and then get stuck in and go and do it. So those pieces are the same wherever you want to go. What Global E-commerce Experts does is joins all that together into one organization. Very little way of in terms of partners, of taking and holding the hand of those sellers into the European market. So let's go into a little bit more detail about what feasibility is. Look, some of this has already been covered, so I'm not going to touch on this too much, because what we're talking about here is understanding the scale of what you've got. Understanding how much you can access in each different country, understanding whether or not your products are suitable. Most products are going to have some degree of suitability. If you're an American seller and you sell cowboy boot spurs, maybe, or gun racks for a pickup truck, maybe you're going to be slightly limited in terms of your market in Europe. But beyond that, it's a case of the size and scope of what you're doing. So once you're feasible, you, of course, as Nick said, you need to get a good VAT partner to come up with your VAT, and beyond that, some compliance when it comes to address services, responsible person, depending on some product categories. And nobody's mentioned DPR yet, so I'm pleased that that's on my slides because no one's mentioned DPR yet. But the environmental regulations, that's another taxation for some countries, France and Germany initially, other countries around Europe expanding. And the address service and responsible person service involves a degree of label checks. Amazon in particular, super hot on labels, making sure your labels are checked, got the right barcode, got the right ingredients shown, not got any banned substances, that kind of stuff. So the compliance piece is a big part of your setup Very important that you're not having your SKUs taken down. And then once you've launched, hey, look, it's been, we've talked about it briefly. An omni-channel approach or a multi-channel approach pays. Yeah, absolutely. We love those numbers. 60 plus percent of the e-commerce market off of Amazon. Most sellers who come in from outside of on online marketplaces from outside of the UK, predominantly we're talking about American sellers who have been successful on Amazon because the marketplace is so large. But that's not exclusive. You might be selling D2C from a Shopify site. You might not be selling on an online marketplace, but nonetheless, you're preparing yourself, choosing the right marketplace for your products, sorting out your payments. We're going to talk, I'm sure one of the other guests here will talk about payments later on, choosing platforms and making your listings, transferring your listings onto new marketplaces and translating. And some really interesting pieces there in terms of translations for non-English speaking sellers and the types of gains that can be had from your A+ content, your back-end content being properly translated, your SEO being properly translated, and any regional nuances that might come from, for instance, additional opportunities that come from some countries. There's little tips like huge Turkish-based speaking population within Germany, for instance, and having paying some regard to that, making big differences. But certainly translating your listings is a big part of that marketplace launch. And then, of course, if you're ready to ship and you've done the business, as John said, in terms of moving goods into the region, you need to work out how to get them into the country. And then you need to choose a good 3PL fulfillment partner. We have an in-house shipping team who are very specialists in e-commerce shipments. What does that piece look like? I'll just keep sticking on the shipping for the moment. Well, what does that look like? Well, if you're an FBA shipper and you're shipping directly into FBA, you might want to ship by air, you might want to ship by sea. If you're going to ship by sea and you're going to ship by pallets, you might want to decant into a 3PL. You might want to ship some of your goods by sea, but to avoid stocking out on your listings, you might want to skim the tops of those pallets and send some of those goods by air directly into FBA. But what was absolutely important is that you choose a shipping and customs clearance agent that understands that if you stock out on any of these online marketplaces, it's pretty bad news. And importantly, and can give you shipping advice commensurate with storage index in FBA, with using a 3PL, with choosing a 3PL which is close to a suitable shipping port, with using shipping routes that are going to come economically into the countries that you're shipping into. So when it comes to those 3PLs, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Global E-commerce Experts has its own 3PL in the UK and in the Netherlands. Talk a little bit about why that is very shortly. But as John said, there's big differences in the way 3PLs work. There's big differences in terms of their service levels, in terms of how they're prepared for e-commerce, how they're prepared for fulfillment, what kind of software they're using to collect your orders and your connections, and the way that they're handling returns. Well, Hai has already talked about how you can look after your returns, how those goods are reworked if they are returned, and how you're buying those and presenting those, for instance, into FBA or skimmed off into ones and twos direct to sellers off your own website. And that, of course, will be necessary if you're taking an omni-channel approach. You'll have one set of stock typically, and you'll need that stock prepped for either a D2C direct-to-consumer model in single items on a final mile courier, or indeed through the FBA system, whether you're an FBA seller or a vendor seller. So I think Alex is going to touch on what that looks like with European multi 3PLs and final mile couriers later. So I won't skip across what those pieces look like too much, because he'll have much better information of what that looks like. But suffice to say, you're thousands of miles away, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. You're going to need someone to look after your stuff. Choosing a 3PL is very important, and choosing the location of that 3PL, as John mentioned as well, is super important to make sure that you can get your goods to market. You get a very high proportion of next day delivery opportunities if those should wish to exist. So we have a 3PL facility in the UK which handles stock supply to the UK, and then you would ship goods separately into the Netherlands to our 3PL facility in the Netherlands to handle the European market, and you can then access FBA fulfillment centres and the final mile courier network from that point onwards. So that does mean that you have to access the UK market, you are shipping goods separately, separate VAT number. Nick and the team at Hello Tax there can obviously get you well squared away with all those numbers that are required, or indeed using international one-stop shop if you're not selling on a marketplace, you're selling off your own website, and what that piece looks like in terms of collecting the VAT at the source of where your goods are being stored. So we're dealing with both of those parts with clients who are both selling off a marketplace or selling selling on directly from their own website. When you move on from there, what you need then is someone close to hand who can help you through promoting what that bit looks like. And actually, a little bit of extra value for anyone listening to this is a QR code there to help you get a free account health check of your existing sales, which you might use as a little bit of initial spot feasibility to understand the scope of your products within the UK and the EU market. And if you're already selling in the UK, perhaps explore some of the other opportunities of an omni-channel approach. So scan that QR code on the screen there if you're interested in getting in touch to have an account health check on us for watching this webinar. Beyond that, of course, you need to be able to coordinate alongside someone who knows how much stock you've got and where you are, because you're within the same fulfillment centres in the UK and in the EU, handling your account management or ongoing account management, looking after your deals and things, because very often for those sellers, they're very busy with their business overseas, and they need some support in replicating that success using the techniques that they're already become accustomed to into the UK and the EU market. We're always big believers, really pleased that John had already made this point, big believers in an omni-channel approach, not just using a marketplace, creating your own website content, gaining control of your data, gaining control of that Dream 100, your top customers, supply sources, maintaining and being able to resell to the existing clients, being able to build up your own business model within these countries rather than leaving that to the marketplace itself and having some repeatability. So that store piece fits hand in hand in terms of GE's account management piece, in terms of looking after and hand-holding those clients into the region. So we've been doing it for a long time. The business has been going for 10 years, but within the business, there's 25 years of e-commerce, marketplace expansion, and international trade. So we're well accustomed to what it takes to build e-commerce brands into the region and handle the inbounding and looking after what that stock looks like. From that, look, it's churn, it's rinse and repeat. Let's churn, crank the wheel, add more marketplaces, add more platforms, and bear in mind at this point you haven't added any new SKUs. These are, as and Nick had already talked about, these are the products you're already experienced in. These are the products that you've already know a success. You've done the product development for, you've spent the money, you've made the investment. All you're doing here is cranking into a bigger market, new countries, make more translations, get a new VAT number, become compliant for that particular country. Although across the EU, the product compliance is all harmonious. So once you've got access to one country from a product compliance perspective, you have access to all of the countries in the EU. So a real opportunity there to add significant growth to the business. And when we're building out a strategic plan with a seller who's wanting to enter the region, we typically tell them that with the right kind of strategy and plans, the right kind of products, and maybe a bit of fair wind behind them, you could well be doubling your US sales if that's where you're based initially by using the European market, simply because there's more people to access, there's more savvy buyers than you've got at home, and the market is simply not quite as saturated. So massive opportunities to be had from the region. And we offer a complete one-stop shop internal golden ticket. It's uncanny the amount of services sitting on the golden ticket there that John was talking about. We do all of that in one piece, from the planning, the setup, onboarding, fulfillment, distribution, growth, and account management on there. If you want to quote, there's a QR code there on the screen. This will work both before, during the live broadcast and afterwards, if you'd like to find out more on that front. So a one-stop shop to European growth. That was a real whistle-stop, because I know that some of the other total gurus on the panel here have already covered some of these things. So I went pretty quickly, but suffice to say, the components of international growth into the region or certainly the blueprint for growth remains the same, irrespective of which country you're going to. So I think between Nick and Hai and John and Alex will have given you a really good insight into what you need and the type of investment. Now, for Amazon sellers, I will just right at the end here, Amazon do offer an incentive scheme or a discount scheme for entering new markets. If you're a US seller, and we'll be pleased if you get in touch with GE, we're happy to give you the link of how to access that in Seller Central. There is a discount of about 5% off of Amazon selling fees, which you can use to enter the UK and the EU market, even if you're an existing seller. That's valid for up to $800,000 of GMV. If you're at first $800,000 of sales in Europe, you can get a 5% discount off the fees. To put that in perspective, the cost of a European expansion of bringing your goods into the UK and the EU would rarely outweigh 5% of $800,000. It's just not going to be that much. So in effect, coupled with some of the tips that Hai has given you in terms of increasing your margins, this is a real opportunity here to grow to a new market without actually taking any money out of your bank account, or certainly investing fairly in what that means, because it's in the form of discounts, and you still need more stock in those regions. So some really interesting pieces there, and lots of tips and tricks which you can give you, and we've had on our own hack series, and I know Nick's been involved in some of those. So really pleased to be involved in the panel here. Hope I didn't go on too long. Excited to help any seller from outside the UK and the EU who's keen to grow their online business and make a go of the European market. So thanks for having me, and thanks to the rest of the panel for listening to me as well. And any questions, yeah, I'd be delighted to answer.